The biggest effects of the Industrial Revolution is going to be the growth of the factory system. And so, before machines, the most common way of producing goods was in the home. And because of that, home life and work life were closely integrated. You either worked in your house if you were weaving cloth on a machine in your house, or men typically worked in an adjoining workshop or perhaps the fields next to their house, but it was all closely integrated. Well, all of that's going to change with the growth of machines. And the biggest reason for that was these new machines, A, were expensive, so your typical household couldn't afford these machines. And B, these new machines were large, and so they wouldn't fit in a typical house. And so a special place had to be created to hold these machines, and that's going to lead to the growth of factories. And so the factory system is going to replace the old putting out system, the working from home and producing goods that way. It's also going to lead to a sharp distinction from your home life and your work life, because now you had to actually leave your house and go to work for 10 to 12 hours a day. It was no longer closely integrated. Also, working conditions were terrible. Workers lost status because it didn't require any special skill to run these machines. The old way of producing goods, you had to have skill to produce textiles. Well, now you didn't need any special skills to oversee these machines. And so workers lose status. Work discipline was extremely harsh. Work hours were extremely long. You were working 12 hours a day with only a small 30-minute break for lunch. Accidents were common. The moving parts of the machines would mutilate people. There wasn't any kind of protective railings or anything like that. And we're also going to see many women and children go to work in the factories because these factory owners could hire a woman for about half of what they had to pay a man. They could hire children for about a fourth of what they had to pay a man. And these women and children could run these machines just as well as a man could. So we are going to see some protest to these changes. Saboteurs. The term sabotage comes from these Flemish workers who would throw their wooden shoes called sabots into the machines and try to mess up the machines in order to sabotage the machines. We also see the growth of labor unions and workers coming together to strike against these unfair practices. Right, so Britain enjoys a monopoly on industrialization for about 50 years. And during that time, they tried to keep their industrial secrets in Britain. And they forbid their skilled workers from immigrating. Some other countries began to pick up on this and paid workers in Britain to leave. But most of the time, what they got were kind of second-rate specialists. And so for about 5 decades, Britain did a pretty good job of keeping their ideas contained to Britain. But gradually, industrialization is going to spread. It's going to spread to Belgium and France first as they begin to industrialize. Germany is also going to industrialize. Once they were unified in 1871, they undergo a rapid period of industrialization. And they chose to focus on your heavy industries, your weapons, your railroads. And so railroads are going to help fuel a huge steel and coal production across Germany. Later, the United States is also going to industrialize. Now, the United States was a little slower to industrialize because you need two things to industrialize. You need money and you need workers. And the United States really didn't have either of those. And so a lot of their initial money to industrialize is going to come from Britain, and a lot of their workers are going to come from Europe as immigrants would come to the United States to provide labor in the growing factories that began to spring up in the United States. And so the United States, their industrialization begins with the textile industry as well. And they bring over British craftsmen to help build cotton textile factories in New England, and migrants supplied labor in those factories. And then the Civil War really sped up this process of industrialization because during the Civil War, they needed more steel, they needed more weapons, they needed more clothing. And then after the Civil War, we're going to continue to see the expansion of industrialization in the United States with the expansion of the railroads. And as railroads spread west, that's going to help fuel the US's iron and steel industries. It's also going to help integrate the US economy and bring the East and West together and integrate the factory sectors of the North with the agricultural sectors of the South.